and we're giving a speech describing how we went home from school. So I got up to give my speech, and he, told us all the things: how to stand, how to hold your fingers together, how to hold note cards, and a whole bunch of stuff. So, okay, tell us how you go home from school. So I started. Here's how I go home from school, and I talked about every turn that I made, how I rode my bike to school, home from school, and all that. And I'm approaching my house, and I see in front of my house, here is next to the driveway. Here is a small tree, and it's small because the original tree had died, so we had to plant a new one there. And on the other corner, in the other corner of the yard, was a tall tree. And I raised my hand like this to indicate it was tall. And he's sitting at the back of the room, okay? And just all of a sudden, he said, "How tall?" So I reached way up. "That tall." He said, "How tall?" And I stood on my tiptoes and reached way up. He said, "How that tall?" And he said, "How tall?" And there was a chair sitting right next to his desk. And I hopped up on the chair, stood on my tiptoes, and reached way up and said, "That tall." And when I did, it was like something inside me broke. Something snapped. Something, some bond, some chain, whatever. And I have never really had a major problem since then, giving a speech, preaching a message. Major problem, okay? Because there are times when you go into it shaking and trembling and hoping that you're going to do the right thing and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, that's just things that I've studied in the past that you would look at and say, well, that doesn't really prepare a person for missions. Well, speech class did, definitely did. Typing class did, and of course, my language study in Costa Rica, that's one of the top three. And it's interesting that I don't have I don't have any theology studies, Bible studies, missiology studies, or anything like that I put in the top three. Isn't that different? But those things came as a matter of course and whatever. But anyway, need to start class. Got the recording going. So hi Tim, how you doing over there in Thailand? Hope everything is well with you. And gonna start the class today with something a little bit different. If I can get the sound to come up better.
I served the Roman Empire. I fought wars against those who did not believe in our gods.
See, now all of a sudden we're off to a totally different thing. Some days things don't work like you want them to. So I'm going to stop that. And what I was going to play for you was Psalm 104, sung in Hebrew and using Hebrew instruments. Really pretty neat stuff. It might. Yeah, let's try that and see if it does. That goes to something else, something else entirely. But that's okay too. Um, let's go ahead and do this one. This is from Egypt. Autoplay. Can you hear it? Okay. Since we're talking culture, cross-cultural stuff, might as well do something a little bit different today. Interesting and different, huh? So, okay, where do I need to go now? I need to go back here. I think I have gotten myself, I have got myself all messed up. There's where I need to go. There I am. Okay. And I don't know, Tim, I might have cut you out of that last thing. We just played some music from Egypt. And I think I stopped sharing before we went back to another recording. So if I missed that, I apologize. But we're in a cross-cultural class, cross-cultural communication. So and we're going to talk about behavioral patterns, and cross-cultural communication, and how important it is for us to understand their behavior, how important it is for us to behave well among them, and some different ideas about how behavior matters. And some of that, is in the book. We're going to talk about it. Some of that is in a couple of those TED Talks that are listed in the syllabus. So one of those TED Talks we're going to look at right now, and I think it's a pretty interesting one. I hope you can understand the guy's accent. He's Italian, so even his English is a little bit has some of that accent to it. But when he really puts on the Italian accent, you can tell it. So, but he has some really interesting things to say to us, about culture.
Great to be in Bergen. This is the second time this week I'm in Bergen. I live in Oslo. I guess I'm living in the wrong place. Yeah. As you quite rightly say, my name, Pellegrino, which is my first name, means pilgrim. It was given to me by my Italian parents. It's as if they knew what I was going to do for the rest of my life. You know, let's give him the name Pilgrim and then he'll travel the world. And that's basically what I do. This is my workplace. I do a lot of traveling. I could give you a fancy title of what I do, but what I really do is I try to help people communicate better, especially in a global business world. So I try to help people communicate better with other nationalities. Now, you know, the first thing you think of when you work with other nationalities in cross-cultural communication is, let's look at the other cultures. Well, I take a slightly different approach. I say to people, take a look at yourself. So I'm going to talk a lot about perception, because it's all about perception, understanding what people see. Now, as you say, I have Italian in me. I have a lot of British in me. Some people are often surprised by my English accent. It's quite nice, isn't it? Yeah? Because you weren't expecting this. I know you weren't. You know, you're expecting me to speak with the Italian accent. Yeah? Don't speak like that. And I've been in Norway for over a third of my life, actually. So I've got a lot of Norwegian in me as well. And I love what I like doing with people. I have these little social experiments to test their perception of me. Now, as I say, I travel a lot. So I like playing with the airlines. I like going up to the airlines and talking English, or sometimes I talk with an Italian accent to see what kind of reactions I get. And English is the best one. If you want good service, you speak English like I do. It's fantastic. People take you seriously. Well, they do, you know. I mean, yesterday the plane to Bergen was late, you know, and if I go up and say, excuse me, it's 30 minutes late, I'm a punctual person, I don't like being late, you know, they just take you seriously. But yesterday I thought I'd try it in an Italian accent. So I went up and I actually said, you know, excuse me, but the plane is 30 minutes late. I'm a punctual person, you know. Exactly. I got the same reaction as you did there, yeah? And this is one of the problems of working with other nationalities. You know, people see what they want to see, and they don't always see what you see. And this is one of the challenges. Now, just before we get into it, culture, let's look at culture. Culture, my definition of culture, and I know this doesn't cover everything. But let's keep it simple. I usually do 2-day workshops in this. I've got 18 minutes. A system of behavior that helps us act in an accepted or familiar way. Keywords there, accepted or familiar. We're basically doing things which are accepted in our social group and which are familiar. So a lot of my work is actually explaining Norwegian behavior to other nationalities. So I'm constantly looking for this sort of, can we describe a Norwegian in a nutshell? And I think I found it. I found this fantastic text on the internet. I want you to read it with me. It's worth reading, eh? If you were to use a color to describe this person, he would have to be green. He lives in isolation in his home, a place he best describes as his and cozy. However, he's not the most receptive of people when it comes to visitors. Okay? The typical Norwegian. He is somewhat primitive, but he is honest, straightforward, and all he really wants in life are the simple little pleasures like peace and quiet. Do you recognize any of this? There are some key words that kind of, can you see that? They jump out at you. And you think, okay, it's a stereotype, but a lot of this is a bit true. And I show this to Norwegians, and they kind of nod, yeah, okay, I'll give you that one. And then I surprise them. This is a description not of a Norwegian, but of a Hollywood film star. Yeah, would you like to know who it is? There it is. It's that person there. And the point about this is you often believe what people tell you as well, you know? I could sit there and tell you this is a Norwegian, yeah, and you believe it. It's not a Norwegian at all, although maybe this could be a Norwegian. There he is going off to his house there. But there are many words in there which are accepted and familiar. Now, another accepted and familiar thing about Norwegian life is the Norwegian forest. I live in the Oslo area, it's all forest. And working across borders is basically, you know, not accepting completely that your assumptions are the assumptions of others. I mean, that's logic, you know, common sense. And the Norwegian forest is a good thing, isn't it? Norwegians in the room. It's all good. It's fresh air, it's nature, it's elks, it's skiing. It's fantastic. Well, that's what my wife thought the first time my father visited us in Norway, because she thought we would do something nice. So my wife asked my Italian father, would you like to go for a walk in the forest? And my father looked at her and said, why? And I had to explain to my wife that you can't say to, if you say to another Italian, hey, you and me, we go for a walk in the forest, that means something else. You don't do that, yeah? But how can you know that, you know? Because, you know, how could she know that? Accepted and familiar. You know, at the time we went for a drive with my father, and we're all looking at the same thing. Look at this, you know, beautiful Norwegian landscape. And my father's taking photographs, you know, that he wants to show his friends. And the road is kind of bumpy, so he says to my wife, could you slow the car down, please? Stop the car. I want to take a proper photograph. And my wife says, but Mr. Riccardi, there's nothing here. And he looks at her and he says to her, I know, I never seen nothing before. But, you know, but what was amazing with this is we're looking at the same pictures and we're using completely different words to describe it. And this is the challenge of working across borders. We've got different ideas of accepted and familiar. Here's what's accepted and familiar to me when I queue. I was raised in the UK. We are the world champions of queuing, waiting in line. And you know, aren't we? We're fantastic, yeah? You know, if you're waiting in line in a supermarket in the UK, let's say there are 10 people waiting in line. And we're all getting a bit impatient, you know, because we're all waiting in line. And then they open a new cash register. Do you know what will happen in the UK? The first 4 people, they won't move. They'll stay in the queue. The next 6 people will move to the next cash register in more or less the same order. And they kind of check with each other. And if they open another cash register, the same will happen. It's like a formation dance. It's fantastic, eh? Would the same happen in Norway? No. What would happen if they shout out, in Norwegian it's ledig kasse, which is available cash register? What happens? Everybody goes for it. It's first come, first served. Isn't that what's accepted and familiar? Now, the first time that happened to me, I was shocked. And I said some not very nice things about Norwegians. But, you know, you've got to dig a bit deeper to find out, why do Norwegians do that? Why are they running for that cash register? Why is it a free-for-all and first come served? I think it's got to do with this. What, they say? This is the King of Norway on a train in 1973, that guy in the cap on the right. This is equality. And I think the queuing system in Norway is all about equality. First come, first served is about equality. And it's the ability to dig under the surface and find out what the underlying values are. That's how you know how to communicate with people. And this thing with equality is really important in Norway. It's the reason we're so laid back with each other. We don't bother with titles. We dress casually. It makes a fantastic business environment, actually, doesn't it? But sometimes this can take you a little bit by surprise. And in those situations where you feel uncomfortable or irritated, we have a tendency to jump to the negative conclusions rather than the positive conclusions, you know? And I mean, I travel all over the world. And I know you're not supposed to, this isn't an advertisement for the airlines, but it's Scandinavian Airlines, and it's Lufthansa, and it's Singapore Airlines. And everybody knows that Singapore Airlines has the best service. Why? Because they have a whole lot more hierarchy in their societies. And therefore, when they serve you, they serve you. And Singapore Airlines staff, I don't know if you've ever been on the Singapore Airlines flight, but you just from the moment they welcome you, they look like they're going to serve you, don't they? I mean, it's just the body language. It's like anything for you, sir. Now, if a Scandinavian Airlines person did this when you came on, yeah, exactly, you would get suspicious, wouldn't you? What's going on? Because it's not accepted or familiar. That's it, you know? This is what it's all about. So this is how we do it. And look at the space. Space is important. Nobody's touching. And if you go to somewhere like Finland, that space becomes even more. Can you see? Look at it. It's fantastic. And look at the way they queue in France. There's nothing like the way I'm used to queuing. And it's different every day. It's never the same. And in some cultures, you need a bit more motivation to stand in line. And this is my favorite one. This is fantastic. Look at this. Huh? Isn't that great? They're all different. We're all doing the same thing in slightly different ways. Now, how do you get across borders? How do you navigate through this? Because you can't learn all the codes. It's impossible. Here's a tip. This is what I'm really passionate about. Curiosity. I am, have been, always will be a curious person. Curiosity gets you through a lot of things. I believe you can ask any question to anybody about just about anything, provided you do it with curiosity. That's it. And curiosity is a great thing. Now, I've got 3 kids. Kids are the most curious creatures on the planet. A recent survey I read, I don't know if I believe this, but I have to quote it. Apparently, 4-year-olds will ask up to 390 questions per day. 82% of those questions will be to mothers rather than fathers. You know why? Because when the kid goes to the father, what does the father say? Go and ask your mother, yeah? You know? Curiosity is so important, you know. And I remember the time, you know, one of the most difficult situations I had, I was having a meal in Helsinki in Finland. And I was sitting there, and the thing is, Italians, when we eat, we talk. We have to talk, actually. We eat and we talk, we eat and we talk. And we're not alone on that, actually. There are many cultures that do that. Finns, on the other hand, don't have to talk. They can talk, but they don't have to. So I'm sitting next to this Finn, and I'm trying to be curious and create conversation. And I thought, okay, small talk. The rules of engagement of small talk. Rule number 1, ask a simple question. Curious, simple question. Rule number 2, listen to the answer, pick out a word, follow up that word. It's really simple, actually. So I was there, and this quiet Finn was sitting next to me, and I turned to him and I said, so have you lived in Helsinki all your life? And he looked at me a little strangely and he said, not yet. Moments like this, you know, which word do I follow up on? Not yet, you know. They really challenge your curiosity, but you've got to be curious, and it's really simple. Do you know what it is about the Nordic cultures? It's all about economy of language. You know, Italians use loads and loads of words to say very, very little, actually. In the Nordic countries, it's different. It's the opposite. It's minimum words, maximum message, right? So where I was raised in the UK is also lots of words, by the way. Look at this. Excuse me, may I just interrupt you for a second? That's 10 words. That's way too many words. The Norwegians managed to do this in one word. Now, that's what I call economy of language. What's the word? Look at this. Yeah, that's it. Here's another example. Look, sorry for bumping into you like that. Terribly clumsy of me. That's way too many words. The Norwegians do it in one word. Ready? There we go. It's fantastic, right? And my favorite, and you know the answer. Sorry, I didn't quite catch what you just said. Well done. One word. Now, the first time I heard that, I just heard this, you see. I've got 3 kids now going, But look beyond the negative side and look to the curiosity. And this is it. We're often misperceived because on a serious note, this which I've heard many times, doesn't often get perceived very positively by other nationalities. You get it, yeah? And everyone has been misperceived in their life. I mean, the Dutch are often misperceived. They complain a lot. They are the world champions of complaining, the Dutch. But why do they do it? They do it because they're looking for something better. And one way you do it is to complain and seek a better result. That's often difficult. I used to work with a guy who was French. He is French. I used to work with him. His name was Yves. Yves complained a lot as well. He complained about everything, and he questioned everything. He had a fantastic mind. You know, I would come into work, and once I came into work, and I said to Yves, "Good morning." And he looked at me and he said, "Is it?" I mean, he was on that level, you know? And I've had my challenges too. The biggest challenge I've had living in Norway and trying to communicate with my fellow Norwegians is, of course, this thing with feelings and expressing feelings. You know, where I come from, we express. What I've had to learn to do, is kind of tone myself down, actually, living in the Nordic countries. You know, living in Norway, tone myself down. Keep it low, keep it calm, because that works better, which is often very, very difficult, yeah? Another thing is rules. I still find rules a little tricky, I must admit. That's where I'm quite Italian. Now, these are people driving into work in a town in Norway. They're following rules. Can you see? And they're simple rules. The rules are keep between the lines and don't use that lane over there. That's the public transport lane, unless you're a bus, a taxi, or an electric car. Simple rules. And look at this. Every single car manages to drive between the lines. It's fantastic. Now, this is a little clip that I took this summer driving down to Italy. This is a police car. That car has got nothing to do with the police car. And it's just a little short clip here. But, you know, look at him. I mean, would you do that in Norway? You know you wouldn't. You know you wouldn't, huh? And this is another clip in France. What they do, look. What happens is, you see, is that they drift. I love that guy in the BMW there. Do you see that? The French guy. Are you going left or right? They do not know yet. That's not decided. It's fantastic. And then some countries, here you can't even see the lines. Where are the lines? Where are they, you know? And I suggested once to an Indian colleague of mine, perhaps if you painted the lines more regularly, people would follow the rules. And he just said, no, that would be a waste of paint, you know? So it would That's why we have traffic wardens. That's why we have traffic wardens in Norway. This is a traffic warden in Norway giving a fine to this car. Now, I'm just going to check. You see, Norwegians know these rules instinctively. It's your duty to learn the rules. But can I ask you, why is that car going to get a fine? Why is he going to get a fine? Too close to the zebra crossing, the pedestrian crossing. What's the minimum distance? And people mumbling 5, 4, 5. You know this stuff. It's like a stupid question. So the day I parked my car in Oslo, let me just explain what's going on. You see the line goes under here and then underneath the wheel. This is no parking. I was in a little bit of a hurry. And my wife said to me, I think you should move your car forward a little bit. I said, why? Just move your car. You'll get a fine. Why? Just please move your car. You could see she was really uncomfortable, you know? And this irritated me. I thought, I haven't got time for this. Let's go. So I left. Okay. And this is especially for the Norwegians in the room. Did I get a fine? Do you feel sorry for me? No. You get no sympathy. No sympathy whatsoever, you know? It's a simple bloody rule. Follow the rules, you know? Now, Italians believe that the power of speech, the power of persuasion is your most important tool in life. We believe that you can appeal to people, and if you're good enough at appealing, they might listen to you, and they might find an alternative solution. So I believed that I could call the Oslo traffic police and talk my way out of a problem. And I can see Norwegians doing this. Oh, no. You're wasting your time. Don't bother. No, I thought I would try. So I called the guy down at the Oslo traffic. Hello, this is Pellegrino. By the way, I spoke English, of course, not Norwegian, because they take it more seriously, yeah? Hello, this is Pellegrino, referring to case 78206. Yes, I have it in front of me here. Listen, I was just wondering if we could be a little bit flexible on this. I mean, we're only talking about 20 centimeters. I'm really sorry. I've learnt my lesson. I won't ever do it again, that kind of stuff. Did it help? Not at all. To his credit, he was good. He was really good. I could hear him clicking in the background. He had all the rules. He was saying, I'm very sorry, but the wheel must be inside the box. It says here in the Rule 5, paragraph D. He had all the answers in front of him, yeah? And then he said something I'll never forget. He said to me, Riccardi is your name. You may be Italian. Well, you probably like football. I said, I do like football. Well, it's like football, the ball must be over the line, the wheel must be in the box. It was fantastic. Now, it was great. He had all the answers, black and white, He had everything. Fine. So I told my friend Yves this, my friend Yves, the French guy, who got really irritated. Remember Yves? Is it? But he's really good at asking questions. And he said, okay, the wheel must be inside the box. He said, what if I take the wheel off the car? What would happen then? I thought that was really interesting, actually. What would happen? So I called back and asked him, what would happen if I took the wheel off the box? He didn't have an answer for me. He couldn't answer that question. Why not? Because it's not an accepted and familiar question, and he doesn't have that approach. Then you need the help of an Italian, because the time I parked my car in Italy, you see, I was looking for a parking place on holiday. Impossible. I see a traffic warden. I go up to her, and I start talking in Italian, and I say, listen, I'm looking for a parking place. And she says, there is a parking house nearby, but don't park your car there. Why not? She says, it's too expensive. 40 euro. Really? What should I do? And she says, I like you. You seem like a nice fellow. I like you. I like the way you talk Italian. I'm going to help you today. She says, park your car over there. And she points over to this sign and says, go and park your car over there. Come on, I can't park. No, it's okay. It's not dangerous. Park your car there. Don't pay 40 euro in the parking house. Park your car over there. I give you a fine for 30 euro. You save yourself 10 euro. Now, I'm not here to discuss whether it's right or wrong, but what I can tell you is that I get it. I get it because I've got it inside me. I've seen this before, and I accept it, and I can see the positive elements. You see, these three cultures I have inside me, just to finish off, this is what I'm passionate about. I've got three cultures inside me, and they're all very different. They're planets apart. They really are in certain aspects. But you know what I try to do on a daily basis, especially with my kids? I try to take the best of all three. Take the best of all three and try to merge them into one new culture where you take the best of all three. Across borders isn't about going across borders in my mind. It's about extending your borders and creating new ones around us. And you know what? If you can create a new culture where you take the best of all three, like I tried to do, and it's not easy, guess what? That's when you create what we call a global mindset. And I believe this is what makes the world go round. Thank you very much.
So he had an interesting way of looking at things, and I liked it. I liked a lot of what he had to say, and a couple of questions that I have for you. Number one, what are the two key words in his description or definition of culture? He had two words he repeated over and over and over again: accepted and familiar. And that's a whole lot more simple than what we've been talking about in some of our definitions in this class. But really, that's what it comes down to. Culture has to do with what is accepted or acceptable and what is familiar. And if in our culture something is not accepted, it's not acceptable, then we reject it. We turn away from it. We turn our backs to it. We ignore it. We react in some negative way toward it. So if we go into another culture and we do something that is not acceptable or is not accepted, that's how they're going to react to us, right? Something that's not familiar. The way the way we talk is not familiar, so they have to get used to us. We have to get used to them. But in various forms and fashions, for my microphone here, in various forms and fashions, we have ways in which these acceptable and familiar things, they're what we do, what we like to do, what we accept, the way we practice, the way we live. But when we go into another culture, then we need to be aware that these acceptable, familiar things, we have to be aware that they're going to be a whole lot different than they have been in our culture. And take a look at this next section of our book, part 6, which has to do with behavioral patterns and cross-cultural communication. And I don't know about you, but I'm not sure that I expected to be talking about behavior in a communication class, but really, that's part of what it's all about, isn't it? Going into another culture, behaving in a way that will allow our message to be accepted by the people that we're going to serve. So going into that meat grinder again, we're on what, the fourth line of it here now, the fourth of 7 dimensions about the ways that our message is going to be perceived and thought about. So have you ever seen anybody at a banquet who did not know proper etiquette? Somebody come in, didn't know which forks to use, didn't know, just how to behave himself, kind of clumsy or just didn't know what to do. Somebody that does not or did not dress appropriately. They come into church, but they're not dressed like we typically accept for people to dress in church. And, and that can be a problem. And sometimes they don't dress appropriately because there's a real reason for it. We had a guy in a church in another part of Indiana who was very, very obese. I mean, he was huge. And the only pants that he could get that were large enough were special made Levi's, and they were like almost like a tent, that he could get around him. And so he came to church wearing Levi's, and we all accepted that because we understood his condition. He was just enormous. But a particular person was preaching a weekend revival meeting in that church and made the statement in this meeting that when you come to church, you dress in a way that God will accept, that you're approaching God. It's like approaching royalty. It's like if you wouldn't go into the court of the king wearing Levi's, and you shouldn't wear Levi's to church either. And you know what? That man never came back to church again. I mean, because there is a perception about what's acceptable. And in this case, it had to do with the way that he was dressed. We all understood why he was dressing that way, and I wish the preacher had understood that. But that's typically how many times we've been, although those things are changing, aren't they? How many of us have seen videos of preachers in Levi's and their shirt tails hanging out, preaching on a stage? No pulpit, just a handheld mic and so on. So a lot of things are changing. Culture doesn't always stay the same, but we have an idea what's appropriate, what's normal, what's good behavior, what's bad behavior. Have you been in a situation where somebody stood too close to you and made you feel nervous and uncomfortable because they were standing so close, and you backed off or wished they would? I've been there a bunch of times, and they tell these stories. In fact, I think the author of our book told the story about a Latin American man and an American businessman, and they started to talk, and the Americans backing up to make further distance. The Latin American is getting closer, and they went all the way along a 40-foot hall and ended up at the other end of the hall before they finished their conversation, just because of that behavioral thing, that acceptable distance, and so on. So, although we're studying communication, we have to understand that communication includes more than just the words we say. How we act has a big impact on how our verbal communication or our message will be received. Again, if we as Christians truly believe that our message is important and we want it to be understood and accepted, we should do our best in every way to present it well. So I think this is an important part of the book. It's not one of the long sections. It doesn't get nearly as technical or as philosophical, and in some ways might be the most understandable part of this textbook. But it begins with a pointed and I think surprising statement. That very first line in the very first chapter of this section: all communication qualifies as behavior. That one made me sit back and wonder. I raised my eyebrows. I said, "What?" Well, think about it though. Every kind of communication that we do, it qualifies as behavior. It is some kind of behavior. So when I am talking, that's a form of behavior. You're sitting there listening to me, and you are performing an act of behavior. You might not be doing very much. You might be sitting like this, or sitting like this, or you might just, whatever. But you're behaving in some form. I'm behaving in some form. And when we wave our arms, when we gesture, when we do all these are behavior. And then certain things that we do and certain facial expressions will convey certain ideas as well. So that's all behavior, but it's also communication. So all communication qualifies as behavior. I raise my eyebrows, but now I understand what he has to say. So let's say it like this. Some communication is verbal, made up of the words we speak. A lot of communication is nonverbal, made up of our actions, facial expressions, gestures, voice tones, and a host of other things. And like we mentioned, even the acts of speaking and writing are behaviors. So again, I'm just calling some stuff out of the book to try to get down to the meat of what he was having to say. I want to look at 7 basic considerations about communications and behavior, how they're related. Number 1, verbal and nonverbal behaviors are intertwined with each other. It's not just what we say that is important, how we say it is equally important. It's not just what we say that is important, what we do is equally important. Notice the underlinings that give emphasis to certain words, because on the first line, it's not just what we say, how we say it, but then later on, it's not just what we say, but what we do. Okay, so those emphases, those underlines, are emphasizing different words to provide those contrasts in a couple of different ways, but they're all bound up in the same communication event. So again, if I sat here with my hands folded and I just stared at the computer screen and I just talked kind of like this for the next hour and a half, you all would sit there and wonder where in the world I was. Did I even think that you were here? Was I aware of your presence? And I don't know. You might think, man, what a speaker who just speaks in a monotone or whatever. So I can do that, but that's not me, and I don't think that communicates. Well, it does communicate, but it doesn't communicate what I want to communicate. because to me, that would communicate the idea that I really don't care what I'm teaching. I really don't care about this class. I really don't care about trying to help you understand something about communication. I'm just here to do a job. But I don't feel that way. I care about this. I've been on the mission field. I've been in cross-cultural communication situations. I've been on the good side and the bad side. I've been on the receiving end of bad cross-cultural communication. And so when I talk about this stuff, it means something to me. And I hope that the way I talk and the gestures that I use, I hope that comes across to you as saying, Mr. Height really cares about this. Mr. Height, he's been there and done that, and he really wants us to understand. I hope that communicates to you, because that's what I'm trying to say. And our gestures, our voice inflections, the facial expressions are all part of that. And if I weren't doing that, you would really wonder where I was and how much I cared. If you've watched the so-called presidential debates, you would know that what the author means. How a candidate acts on stage often gets more attention than what he or she says. Eye rolls when another person is speaking, and then it seems like the camera. It always happened to be on like Kamala Harris when she would roll her eyes. When Mr. Pence would say something, he would say something, her eyes would go like that, and you knew what she was thinking. She never had to say a word, but you knew. That's crazy stuff. So we've seen that. When they interrupt another candidate, when they don't shake hands with an opponent before the debate begins, all of those things that we could see, even though not a word had been spoken, we knew what they were saying, right? So our actions communicate. Number two, and this is a paraphrase of the author, some nonverbal behaviors are intended to make a statement. So the eye roll that we talked about, for example, is intended to express disbelief or exasperation. But here's an important statement. It's underlined. I want you to notice it. All nonverbal behavior is at least potentially communicative. All nonverbal communicate or nonverbal action or behavior is at least potentially communicative. For example, a person who allows his attention to be distracted probably communicates that he's bored, even when he doesn't want others to think that. I've been teaching a class in Hebrews, a study of Hebrews in our Wednesday night Bible studies in our church. And last Wednesday night, which would be a week ago last evening, one of the fellows came to me to apologize for the week before. And he said, Brother Height, I don't know if you noticed or not, but as you were speaking, I could hardly stay awake. He said, I just want you to know that it was because I had not been getting my rest. It wasn't because I was bored. Why did he say that? Because he knew that an unintentional message could be sent by his sitting in the pew like this. And that unintentional message could be, Brother Height, you're boring me to death. I wish you just quit this. And that's not his feeling at all. I mean, he's probably one of the best promoters of that particular class in the study that we're doing. So I've got it in here. We really need to pay attention to that. That's a powerful statement. That's a powerful statement, especially for those of us who are going to be preachers or teachers or missionaries. That's a powerful statement because it means we must be on guard all the time. Just as Christians, we ought to be, much less as Christian leaders or teachers or missionaries, or whatever our calling might be, because we can destroy our testimony, we can destroy our ministry by some unintentional act that conveys an idea that we did not intend to convey. And then all of a sudden, we have to scurry around and explain ourselves and try to redeem ourselves and try to get that reputation back or get that authority back or whatever it is that, So I blew it. early in my time in Guatemala. We were in National Church Convention, the annual business meeting stuff of the National Church, and the we were going through the election time, and normally in election times in these meetings, you have like the president or director gives his report for the year, and then they vote on who should be the president, and then the vice president does the same thing, and so on. And so they dismissed. I don't remember exactly how it happened, but they may have had the election for treasurer, and then we took a break. But there had not been a treasurer's report. And I made the very sad mistake as a newbie, a novice missionary, of approaching the treasurer, who was not very pro-American. And I made the sad mistake of going to him and just asking a question. And the question was, Brother Manuel, don't we usually have the treasurer's report before we elect the treasurer? And he exploded. I mean, he literally chewed me out. He shot my lips off, okay, like that thing we saw a couple of days ago. And it was like, wow, I mean, what did I do? All I asked was a simple question. And my simple question was, isn't this the normal procedure? He took it as my voicing displeasure in his being the treasurer, my voicing distrust in his work as the treasurer, just because I asked a question. And it took a long time after that to get into some kind of decent relationship with him so that we could really work together as part of that national church. So things that we don't intend, things that we're not even thinking about, but other people see us doing them, or other people see us reacting in certain ways, and they don't have to be verbal, but they see that reaction, that says something to them. And it might not be what you intend, but it's going to affect you, and it's going to, because of how other people think, okay? So to me, in the whole, probably in this whole lecture that I'm doing right now, probably one of the very most important statements is the statement in that paragraph about the nonverbal, all nonverbal behavior, potentially communicative. Doesn't mean it always happens, but as the potential of communicating something that you don't intend to communicate. So we need to be careful. We need to be careful because we can blow it. And I'm sure we all understand. I'm sure we've all heard, and we hear it over and over again when we hear about another ministry leader who has fallen into moral sin. And we hear this thing: you can ruin a lifetime ministry by one act. And if you do the one act and you ruin the lifetime of ministry, you probably can never get that back in the rest of your life. And if you do, you will do it at great price. So there's a tremendous lesson for us just as Christians, okay? Let's be careful about the way we act, even things that we are not intending to do or say. Okay, moving on. Here's one of the areas where he does get a little bit technical, where he speaks about digital communication versus analogic communication. So digital communication is verbal. Generally speaking, it's precise. We try to use words whose meanings are understood. If we try hard enough, we can find words and phrases that express what we say. And it kind of illustrated it by that digital clock on the right. You know, that's a precise time. It even has AM to discern whether it's morning or evening. I even thought about finding one that had the seconds to really be precise, you know, and you can get a stopwatch, you know, that'll do the hundreds of seconds and all that sort of thing. That's digital, that's precise, that's, you know. But then there's analogic communication. You know, the analog is the clock face that we see down below. It's behavioral, it's not verbal. It's not necessarily precise. So you look at that clock, and I don't know about you, but I look at that clock and I say, that's about 3:30. I'm not even sure it's that, because the small hand should be closer, should be farther down, but but do I really stare at that thing and say, man, that clock says it is 3:28? How many of us do that? Most of us don't. Most of us just look at it and say, it's about 3:30, right? So we're not precise, it's analogic. And that's what behavior is. So people look at a behavior and they think they know what that behavior is, but they may not really know. So the mom crying at the wedding, why is she crying? Because daughter is leaving home, she's going to miss her girl. She's sad. Daughter's found a really tremendous guy. I mean, he's going to be a great husband. She's going to have a happy life. So she's thrilled with this wedding. Or her feet hurt and she can hardly stand it, and she's in so much pain, or she's got arthritis, or why is she crying? We don't know. All we know is she's crying. Crying does not convey precisely, and that's what he's trying to tell us here. The difference between digital communication, which is precise and usually is verbal, and a logic, which is not precise and is usually behavioral. And then he goes on and talks about two levels of communication: content versus relationship. So you've got content communication. That's what I'm doing to you right now. I'm giving you content. We're talking about feelings. We're talking about ideas. We're talking about conveying these things. Content communication relates facts, events, feelings, and ideas. It's usually verbal. We say or write, for example, the date at the top of a letter. That's precise, right? That's content. In a letter, we tell about the events that happened. We express our feelings toward the person that we're writing to. And so we can probably say that content communication is digital. It's like the verbal. It's precise. It's aimed at a certain thing. We're intending to say certain things, and we find the words to say those things. So content is a level, but it's also a type. Content and digital, I think, go very closely together. Relationship communication has to do with the bond or the connection between the two people who are talking, or the two groups, or the person and the group. So that's usually non-verbal. So things like how we greet one another, whether or not we smile at each other, whether or not we pay close attention when the other person is speaking, might be unspoken indicators of whether or not we're friendly toward one another, might be indicators of how we feel toward one another. So it's always interesting to me to see a young couple in love, they're dating, maybe they're recently married, and they sit across the table from each other, and as they're eating, they're looking each other in the eye, and they're talking, and it's like nobody else exists. You ever seen that? Yeah, and you've probably tried to break into conversation like that, and it's almost impossible because they are so fixed on each other, right? And that says something to us. But if here's a couple and they say they're dating and they say they might get married someday or whatever, but they just sort of, they might say hi. They're just kind of lackadaisical about their relationship and all that. And we look at them and we say, not so sure about that. Or we see the guy, going off with some other girl, and we said, well, that relationship's not going to work out very well. So I was in Cuba. Oh, it's going to be 2 years ago now. And with a Cuban pastor who was talking with Daniel Melton and me about their ministry and about some things going on in their ministry and so on. And his wife sitting at the table. So the table is kind of long, maybe like to seat two people on each side. And so he's sitting on this end of that side of the table. I'm sitting at the very end of the table. Daniel Melton's right across from him. And his wife is sitting at the far end of this table, kind of like at the corner of it. And she's not talking to him because he's talking to us. But I would look at her every once in a while, and all the time he was talking, she was focused on him. And there was this look in her eye that said, I love this guy. I mean, it was palpable almost. I looked at her and said, man, I know a whole bunch of guys who would love it if their wives would look at them like that, even when he's not talking to them. I mean, it was like, he's adorable. I feast on everything he's saying. It's like, oh wow, I'm thinking, boy, but see, that's behavior that speaks. And in that particular case, I think it spoke a pretty clear message. But that's a relationship message, right? So nonverbal communication, number 5, can sometimes stand alone. That is, no words, and still be precise. So the author mentions the example of a traffic policeman. You're kind of coming up, and especially if you've been in a foreign country, but I think even sometimes here in certain situations, here's that cop standing out there. Maybe he has a white glove on, and you're approaching the intersection. He holds the hand up like this. What do? Wave at him? No, he's waving at me. He's being friendly. No, he's not being friendly. What's he telling you? And you know what he's telling you, right? And if if you don't stop, he's going to whistle you down, or he's going to radio something to a cop down the way someplace, and you're probably going to get arrested. That's a nonverbal message that's very precise. There aren't too many of them, but every once in a while there are. There's one. So we could be in church with my children, and they could be doing something, and all I had to do was, I can't do it very loud anymore, but snap my fingers and they knew who it was and what I was intending to say. I didn't have to say a word, but that was a pointed nonverbal communication. So number 6, nonverbal communication can be very important, often more important than we realize. So he quotes a person as saying that conversation between two people is only 35% verbal, 65% nonverbal. But I was preparing to give a speech class last year to a group of Hispanics, and I found this information that's in the graph to the right, that in a speech that someone is giving, 7% is content. The other 93% of meaning that comes across to those people that you're talking to has nothing to do with the words that you say or your vocabulary or whatever. Has to do with your voice inflections, because those are meaningful too, aren't they? I mean, you can tell what I'm emphasizing by the tone of voice I use, by the pitch of the voice I use. At certain times, the faster I talk or the slower I talk, you get the idea by what I'm trying to say with my voice. So that's 38%, according to this particular source. And then 55% of that speech was the person's personal appearance. So, I mean, you go to a certain place to preach, you really better have a pretty good idea who these people are, what class of people they are, how they expect you to dress, and so on, because they will or won't accept your message, perhaps, based on your appearance. Now, some of that appearance could be because you're a different skin color, so they're discriminating and they're discriminatory in their thinking. It could be just because they don't like the particular style of suit or dress that you're wearing. But it could be that you're just not dressed like they accept and expect you to dress. Again, acceptable and familiar. So until these recent years, when there have been more and more young preachers, especially preaching in Levi's with the shirt tails hanging out, but way back before that, in Latin America and in the Philippines, there has been a style of dress that even in the almost the most formal of occasions is acceptable. And that's a shirt that some people call guayabera. And there's another word for it too that I can't think of right now. But that's the shirt that it hangs out of your pants. It's square cut all the way around. There are no tails or anything like that. So it's a square cut. Most of the time, it has little tiny pleats. It has a couple of pockets here, a couple of pockets down here. They make them in all kinds of colors. But that shirt in white is as formal as any suit that a man can put on. And that's especially great in the tropics, where you're wearing a suit can be really miserable. So presidents making speeches will dress like that because that's not just perfectly acceptable, that's even one of the expected styles in a formal occasion from somebody as important as a president. So interesting how those things come across. But again, the idea is that so much of how we're accepted and how our message is accepted, so much has to do with our appearance, with our behavior. A lot of it has to do with the message, yes. But you can see right here that our message can be so easily covered up and misconstrued and misunderstood and misperceived just because of how we act or the way we dress or some other facet of our behavior. And then number 7, this was not one of the 6 that he had, but it is a statement that he made that comes from a couple of pages farther along, where he's talking about bodily actions having limited denotative meaning, but being rich in connotative meaning. So need to remind us of the meaning of denotation and connotation. Okay? Denotation is that specific meaning that we have assigned to a word. Connotation is the feeling, the emotion, the association that we have with that word or whatever. So the example given here is the word blue. You're wearing a blue sweatshirt. Okay, I mean that's blue, right? I mean nobody would dispute that. That's blue. But if I say I'm a little blue today, is it because I'm wearing a blue sweater? Is it because my shirt's blue? Or does it convey something else? There's a connotation, there's a feeling. And so, we can be sitting in church and the pastor maybe gives a certain illustration, and that illustration recalls something to our mind, and it's maybe a sad event in our lives. And so the thing he's talking about maybe is very positive, but that word brings to us a sad moment in our lives that brings a sadness to our thinking. And so that word connotes something sad to us, even though the meaning might be a very positive meaning. So that denotation, connotation idea, they can be very, very different. And the idea that he's wanting to get across here, again, is that what we say is precise. It's like digital communication. What we say, we can pretty well control because of the words we use. But the behavior, the feeling, the association behind those words, and with which we use those words, and so on, they're related areas, but they're so very different, and they can really affect how we hear, how we perceive, how we understand what a person is saying to us. So important for us to understand behavior, and it's important for us to understand their behavior, because we go into another culture and they act in certain ways toward us, and we don't know whether to be offended. We don't know whether it's good or bad. So, for example, let's say that you come to school on Monday and you're wearing a new dress. You're not wearing her before, and it's obviously new. So somebody walks up to you and says, "Wow, that's a cool dress. How much did you pay for it?" That good or bad? Acceptable? You really feel like really feel comfortable when somebody asks you how much you paid for it? Hmm? Okay. 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 So it might depend on how they say it. It might depend on who it is that asks it. Okay. Um, a lot of times in our culture, for a lot of us, that is not a question that you ask unless you're the best of friends. So maybe that's part of me from being out west. You know, in Idaho, is that a good question to ask somebody? How much did you pay for that shirt? How much did you pay for that car? You know, is that good or bad? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Same thing over here. Hmm? Okay. So it depends on what it is. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And but the reason why I bring it up is because when we were in Guatemala, I wanted to get around the town, small town, and you could walk pretty well. But sometimes I wanted to get around a little faster, but I didn't want to get the car out all the time. So I bought a bicycle. First question they asked me was, "How much did you pay for that?" None of your business. I mean, that was my inside reactions. None of your business what I paid for it. I bought it for me. I bought it with my money. You don't need, but that was part of their society. I mean, I mean, we would come in like after furlough, and we had a couple barrels of personal belongings, and so we're unpacking some stuff, and here's a lady in to visit with my wife or whatever. And Kathy pulls something out of the barrel. Oh, that's pretty. How much did you pay for that? No, come on, no, that's not really any of your business. Well, they thought it was. We didn't think it was. And maybe, like you guys say, it depends on the person and so on. But this is also a cross-cultural situation, and so we didn't know exactly how acceptable that was and all that sort of thing. So, the things we talk about, the questions we ask, the behavior, and all that, they all tie together and they all have meaning. And we need to do our best to understand and be careful what we say, how we say it, and the behavior that accompanies what we say. So let's take a break and then go into the rest of what we have here. And while you are on break, I'm going to see if I can find that Hebrew rendition of the psalm. That's pretty neat. I'm pretty sure that you would enjoy it. So see you in about 10 or 12 minutes. Hmm. How about that? Yes. Okay. So, Mr. Timothy Rife in Thailand. Good to be with you again via Google Meet. And I did find that other video of Hebrew music, so we'll play that when we come back to class, and then we'll finish up with the lecture for today. So hope everything is going well with you. Today, of course, is April the 1st, which is April Fool's Day, and so we got snow today. Not a whole lot, but some. And I looked out the window, and sure enough, I saw snow. My wife texted and said they had snow. My daughter texted and said they had snow also. So on April Fool's Day, when spring is what, 2 weeks old now or close to, and we had snow. So April Fools, I hope you have a, well, I hope you have a good day, and I hope nobody pulls a really bad April Fool's joke on you. Are you guys good at doing April Fool's jokes? Okay. I have a hard time with it too. I don't even try. But my father-in-law was tremendous at it. He just, and he would get his wife every single year. I mean, every year. And she would always wake up and say, okay, today is April the 1st. I'm not going to let him fool me today. And invariably, he would get her. I'm not sure all how he did it. But sometimes it was just because he would stand at the window and look out and go, you know. And so she wondered what he's looking at, what's going on out there. So she come over to see. And he's, nothing's going on, just, just looking out the window. So how do you do with April Fool's jokes, Anna?
I actually didn't really have any, except for in the morning. I do morning shift at 7. There's like a little snowfall. I'm like, oh, we should have canceled like 4. And then it could just keep snowing all day. Oh,
No. Oh, you're not good at doing them?
I didn't
Or,
have time to do them.
okay. You have people do them to you?
Um, Some of my students tried to pull it off. They
Yeah.
really didn't work. Like one ate a glue stick, which was actually marshmallow. But she's
Okay.
like, "Miss Hannah," and she's like, I'm like, oh no, you can't eat glue. But that was it.
Yeah. Kids are great for stuff like that. So you guys good on April Fool's jokes in Idaho, Dennis? Envy. So you're grinning like you know of a good one that somebody did to somebody. Is there a particularly good one that you remember? What were you fixing? And how long did you carry that on before you told her it was? Did she get kind of fluttery about it? Oh no, I don't know. Okay. I'm not good at doing it, so I don't even try. But I do have a friend who is Irish, so I try to do something for him every year. So this year, I found a pair of bright green socks with, I think, the pot of gold or something embroidered into them. So I sent those to him for St. Patrick's Day. And he wore them.
Transported from place to place. And the guys, every single.
Really?
So if you look outside, and like, they're all, they're everywhere. They just look out. Like, I'm just pretty much, you know,
Yeah. Wow.
So it was really, that's awesome.
Yeah. So Brianna's talking to us on break about going to Haiti and being there to build a school, and saying that they had to be careful of that nonverbal behavior, because if they made eye contact with the guys would blow kisses at them, and probably nothing really meant by it, like, but
Outside of the bus.
okay, so
Inside the bus.
so if you're in the bus and it happens through the window, that's one thing.
Yeah.
If you're on the street where they are, that's something else. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty important to know. You you know, you guys, you were in Dominican Republic, no, in Honduras recently, Dominic, and you know, I was going to ask you a little bit about that. I haven't had a chance to, but um, you know, there's probably some. Was there some nonverbal behavior that you wondered about down there, or was it, or were there some things that they did or ways they acted that were meaningful in some way that we normally don't do? Not you can think of. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to mention something about that a little bit later on. But you know, but just talking about communication and miscommunication and all that stuff, and especially talking about cross-cultural situations. We had a young lady who came down to Guatemala for a missions internship, and one of the things we told her early on was, "You have this and this and this and this to do. These are your responsibilities." And they included things like helping the missionary single lady clean her house, and the girl did not want to do that. Helping cut out flannel graph figures and do other kinds of things to prepare for kids services. She didn't really want to do that either. She wanted to get out and like witness to people. So one of the things we told her very early on was, if you witness to somebody, you want to do some evangelism, personal work, whatever, you talk to the ladies. You do not talk to the men. She disobeyed. And she tried her Spanish, and her Spanish wasn't very good. And so she went up to this young guy somewhere in Jalapa, and she said, tried to say to him, Jesus loves you. But what she said was, I love you. And she used the tu form, which is the familiar, yo te amo. And that night, he was knocking on her door. We had to call the guard to come and take him away. It scared her to death. But you know, there are some cultural norms that you just don't violate if you don't want to cause problems. Gerald, okay. Mm-hmm. Oh, really? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can understand. Yeah. And there was something like that in Guatemala too, a little bit similar. It wasn't because something was bad, but the missionaries told us, you know, we in America when we tell somebody that we want them to come, we go like this. And they said, no, you don't do that because how was it they said? You don't do this. That's what it was. You don't do this because to them, or no, you don't say goodbye by waving your hand like this. That's what it was. You don't say goodbye waving your hand like that because that means to them come to you. So again, a gesture, and you need to learn what the right ones are. Yeah, and well, I've always been glad for somebody willing to, willing to be plain about things you should or shouldn't do and reasons why. And I know sometimes it's hard to talk about, and sometimes it's kind of embarrassing, but when you know the reality of it, that really helps you be careful. So today is April the 1st. It's April Fool's Day. It's also opening day of Major League Baseball. And the LA Dodgers are about ready to start playing against the Colorado Rockies. So, I'm a sort of a halfway Dodger fan, and Clayton Kershaw's pitching today. So, okay, well, before we do anything else, let me go on here and let's present again off of a tab, and let's find that Psalm 104, sung in ancient Hebrew. pretty interesting. At least I think. I like that kind of stuff. Okay, well, back to class and types of silent language behavior that our author talks to us about. And we're going to kind of go through these quickly. He gives us some brief ideas of what they are. But again, important for us to keep in mind, even if we don't plan to serve God in other cultures, because they're just things that anywhere we are the kinds of physical, nonverbal communication that can make or break our relationships with other people. So physical characteristics is number one. And there are some things we can't control, like our skin color, unless you're a person who gets a tan every summer and then you go white every winter. But other than that, you can't control your skin color. Hair color, to a certain degree, can't be controlled. Whether you're tall or short, or a lot of things like that you can't control. But there's some other physical things that we can, and things like personal hygiene can be very important, and especially in certain parts of the world, like in the Orient, where in South Korea, for example, one of the places where personal hygiene is absolutely at the top of the list. Number two is body language. So the gestures that are good or bad in other countries, the thumb and forefinger sign that we've got there, we do it all the time here to say that it's okay, but in some places like Brazil, it's a vulgar sign, so you don't do it. I understand even thumbs up in some places is a vulgarity in some places, so have to be careful about that. A lot of hand type signals that wherever we go, we need to get a pretty good idea of what those mean and how people perceive them. And I was asking Dominic a little bit about what he might have seen in Honduras. And you probably have to live there for a while to really observe some of this, but there are actually people in Honduras and in Guatemala who can practically carry on a conversation with sign language. And I'm not talking about spelling out words or learning the international signs for words and so on. I'm just talking about things that they do. I mean, this is no, and that's kind of become universal at least in a lot of places. They have a way of shaking their hands like this, and their fingers snap together to show exasperation, or maybe some anger or some impatience. It's snap like that. They tell a story about a family whose father was in the hospital in the capital city, and they had no communication with him. And this would have been years and years ago. And they didn't know when he would get out of the hospital, how he was coming home or whatever. But there was a family member who worked on the train that went by every day. So each day as the train went by, somebody would be standing out in the yard, and they would do something like this, which meant, how is our father doing? And he would sign back to them as they're going by on the train, so that they would know he's not doing well or is doing well. He's about to get out of the hospital, he's coming home tomorrow, whatever. And not a word being shared. And this is not international sign language, but these people knew what he was saying as he went by. So those kinds of things can really be can really convey a lot. Crossing one's legs and showing the sole of one's shoe is very offensive to some. That has been in the past in Egypt, especially. And I remember the first time I went over, they said, be very careful about crossing your legs, even crossing your ankles like Dominic right now, because the sole of your shoe is pointed at me. And to show me the sole of your foot is offensive. It conveys a curse. And so in Egypt, especially the first times I was over, it was keep your feet flat on the floor. I would cross my legs and then, oh, I can't do this. Put my foot back down again. It is changing in the city, but out in the country, it's still pretty much that way. Number three, touching behavior. How do people greet each other? Is it okay for a man to embrace a woman? Is it proper for a man to hold his wife's hand in public? I mean, just a lot of things that go on. In the Dominican Republic, you greet someone, whether it's man or woman. You greet the person by kissing in the air on this cheek, kissing air on this side, and then oftentimes a third time on the other side. So that's, you're not actually kissing each other, but you're kissing the air alongside. In Bolivia, especially between the men, it's reach out and shake hands, and then take your hands away and reach out and clap each other on the shoulders 2 or 3 times, and then shake hands again. So, I mean, you just imagine everybody that comes into church, it's, a little bit time consuming, but it was effective. In Ghana, to shake hands was to shake like we normally do, and then to shake with hands together like this, and then as you slid your hands apart, to pop those middle fingers, so that it sounded like snapping your fingers. And they were good at it. I have found one person I could do it with, and I can only do it a part of the time. But it was that bump snap, and that's just how they do it there. So how do people greet each other? And is it okay for a man to greet a woman in that way, or is it only among the men? We've always heard that it's bad for a man to touch a woman. That's what the Bible says. Good for men not to touch a woman. And so the preaching that I've heard is, you don't dare, And then I got to Central America, where, well, actually, I married into a family that was a huggy family. And so I remember the first time I met my wife's cousins from Alabama. They were cute girls. One of them blonde and freckled and really pretty. And all 3 of them came in. Oh, Steve, good to meet you. And I'm this. I got to where I could embrace them too. And that was good, because when I got to Guatemala, then to embrace one another in greeting is fine. Or you really have a good relationship, and so it's okay to embrace. Nothing untoward about it. Even to the point where there are a couple of missionary wives, maybe a little younger than I am, but one especially, from the Central American field, that almost expects to get a hug from me every time we meet, because we're Central Americans, kind of. Okay, so is it okay? Is it not okay? Is it okay for a man to hold his wife's hand in public? Some places yes, some places no. In India, a wife does not walk with her husband. A wife walks 3 paces behind her husband, because a woman walking next to a man is considered to be his mistress. So you don't want your wife to be considered a low-class woman, so you don't walk with her, which is not very romantic. I mean, just all kinds of things like that. Okay, that you go to that culture, and you learn what's good and what's bad, and you need to comply with what's good and what's bad, so that you're not putting across the wrong idea. Spatial relationships. How close can we stand to each other without feeling uncomfortable? How do we deal with privacy? We Americans value our privacy. So we have locks on our doors, and we sometimes even have locks on our bedroom doors, and we have locks on our bathroom doors, And if I'm shaving, I don't want some neighbor person walking in while I'm shaving. That's not really, but then I remember in Guatemala, I was down to visit a pastor in Monjas one time, and we chatted for a little bit. It was right after breakfast, getting ready to have a service someplace or whatever. So he excused himself and went into the bathroom to shave. So he's got his face all lathered up, and he's in a t-shirt, and he's part way through shaving, doors wide open, and come a couple of ladies from the local church. I mean, they just walked in the front door standing wide open too. So they just came right in and right up to the bathroom door to talk to him. And he's in the bathroom shaving, and I'm thinking, where in the world is privacy? Well, for them, it didn't matter. You know, I mean, they just privacy to them is not the issue that it is to us. Where does a preacher stand when he gives his message? Um, in Bolivia, no one stands behind the pulpit until it's time to preach, and then the preacher stands there. All the announcements are made from the floor in front of the platform. Any Sunday school teaching that's done is done there. Song leading is done down there. Everything that happens in the service is done from the floor, off the platform until time to preach. And then the preacher gets behind the pulpit to preach. There are churches. Sometimes it's denominational. Sometimes it may be cultural, where there are two pulpits, one on either side, and one is for reading scripture, the other is for preaching. And there's a message conveyed there. The message that's conveyed is God's word is important. And so here's the pulpit that we read God's word from, and that's how we use this. And this over here is for preaching. And a missionary friend of mine, when we were going to have a funeral in a church with a split pulpit like that, I remember him saying to me, Steve, I just really don't like this, because having that pulpit over to one side is an indication that preaching is not important. And preaching should be the central part of our service. And I thought, okay, I can see that. So I kind of started thinking that way myself. And then you start thinking, what's really most important? Is it what you say or what God says? And when they have that split pulpit like that, they're saying what God says is at least as important as what you say in your preaching. So there's, how close do we stand to each other? So there's that bubble in the illustration at the right that kind of gives an idea. Temporal relationships have to do with time. How important is it to be punctual? Are there times when it's more important than others? How long should a church service or sermon last? What are the proper times to visit someone in his home? In America, more and more, a church service shouldn't last more than an hour, which means a sermon probably shouldn't last longer than 25 to 35 minutes. And if it's 35 minutes long, you better not have much in the way of preliminaries. Go to Latin America, and it can be a 3-hour service, hour and a half message, or maybe a 45-minute message, but you've got 13, maybe 10 special songs, and they sing 13 or 14 choruses along the way. Just totally different ways of worship and relationships to time, and how they think about time and so on. Number 6 is paralanguage. That's the way we speak. So how loudly should we speak? How fast? How important is good pronunciation? Do we speak differently in private than we do from the pulpit? How many of you know preachers who, when you talk to them at the front door of the church, or maybe you've had them to your house for dinner, and they carry on pretty normal conversation, their voice tones are pretty normal, and so on and so on and so on. But when they get in the pulpit, they take on that kind of stern voice and that preaching mannerism, and that, somebody like that. I know several. And some people say that's bad. Other people say it's good. People say it's good because that conveys the importance of the message and the authority of God's word. Some people say it's bad because it can put people off. Here's the man, boy, you can't get close to him. I wouldn't want him to be my pastor or my whatever. And I think it's so unfortunate if people do that. I've heard about one particular evangelist who is now deceased, who was very rough in the pulpit. I mean, he would have his hand behind his ear like this. One hand behind his ear and the other hand is out like this. And he had big, heavy eyebrows anyway. And he kind of closed his eyes like this, and his hands behind his ear, and his fingers out like this. And he's really going away. And the message that he preached was a pretty rough message too. And boy, I remember the first times I heard him, and it was like, man, well, I don't know. I don't know what he must be like. I mean, wow. But I have heard, and then I later experienced, that out of the pulpit, around the dinner table, sitting in the living room after service, he was as kind and friendly, and his speech was not that hard driving kind of speech. So he was very, very different out of the pulpit than in it. And I personally think that's unfortunate. I really think that who you are out of the pulpit should be pretty close, at least, to who you are in the pulpit, so that you're not turning people away by some demeanor that they miss that they misperceive. Okay, number 7, artifacts and environment. What's your church like? What's the architectural style? What's the furniture? Um, do you have a communion table in your church that is only used for communion? And is it set off to one side until you have a communion service and then you bring it out? Or is it always there to remind people that we have communion from time to time? Is anything else ever allowed to be on that communion table? Those kinds of things. Those can be important in certain places. In your church, do you have a Christmas tree? I, I've had people say, no, no way, have a Christmas tree in church. And especially in days gone by, now it's more and more acceptable. But boy, there have been days in the past where the Christmas tree was no. How about a nativity scene? Is a nativity scene okay to have in your home, in church? Yes. Okay. Not in Central America. Kind of interesting. In Central America, you can have a Christmas tree in church, but not a nativity scene. Why? Why would you suppose? Those are little figures that represent who? And the littlest little figure in that nativity scene represents whom? And so in Central America, with the Catholic background that the majority of people there have, that is idolatry. Now, we don't believe that one. I mean, we don't take it that way, right? And if you were to go with me to Egypt, we would walk into numerous churches where there would be a painting on the wall behind the pulpit of Christ. And he might have a painted halo around his head, very Catholic, actually very Orthodox. And there would be a heart painted here, and maybe even some blood dripping from his heart. And we would look at that. Central Americans would look at that and say, "You can't do that. You can't do that. That's the Orthodox churches do that, and our Christian people in Egypt have accepted that as being a fair representation and not idolatrous." So there's so many. Again, you go into different cultures, and you need to feel your way along and see what's acceptable and what's not, and why. Artifacts and environment can include the way a person dresses, the use or the non-use of cosmetics, whether or not one wears or uses visual symbols like crosses, are colors important, and so on. Just a host of things that when we get into different situations, we need to take into consideration. And going back up just quickly to the touching behavior part, one of the most embarrassing things that ever happened to me, although it was only personally embarrassing, was when I was taken to an Egyptian church to preach an evening service. And I think the pastor knew enough English to interpret, or maybe we had an interpreter, I don't remember. But I do remember that the pastor conveyed to me that to wait after the service because we were going to walk to the apartment building where he lived, which was like 2 blocks down the street, and we would have a small meal together before I would be taken home. Okay, so I waited. And when everybody was done, we walked out, he locked the door, and then he took my hand. And he did not take my hand just, he took my hand like this. So we are walking down the street together in a suburb of Cairo, and he is holding my hand like this. And there are people sitting on their doorsteps on both sides of the road as we are walking along. And I am thinking, what must these people think? Well, they didn't think anything. I mean, it was like, hey, the pastor's got a friend. He's taking home for supper. Big deal. So, yeah. Um, have you guys ever been kissed by a man? I have. In Egypt, for one. Yeah. In Egypt, for one, and in a certain church in Pennsylvania for another time. I was there in a weekend meeting. It was like a weekend missions convention. Faith Hemmeter was there also, and I watched these guys on Friday night and Saturday night and Sunday morning, and they'd go out of the church and they'd kiss the pastor on both cheeks and go out, and I'm thinking, I don't want that to happen, but he kind of understood, and so he would shake my hand and I would go until the last night, Sunday night. Everything is over with. I'm getting ready to go to get out and go home, and he walked up and he flat kissed me on the lips, and it's like, oh wow. But that's part of their religious culture in that church, even here in America. So be prepared, guys. You never know what's going to happen, but please understand that if it's a culturally accepted and what was that other word? Accepted and familiar. Yeah, thank you. If it's accepted and familiar, then don't worry about it because it's probably okay. Okay, and then finally, the missionary and behavioral norms. The missionary has a threefold responsibility in regard to behavioral norms. First, and I want us to underline this and really be sure we get this. It's just like we've talked about in the Lingenfelter book last time. Things that are top priority, and this is top priority. First, he must behave according to the standards revealed by God in the scriptures and in his own conscience. Okay, I mean that has to be number one. We cannot violate scripture and do things that are sinful and morally wrong. Second, he must accommodate to behavioral patterns considered right or proper within his respondent culture. So that's why we need to learn what's good and bad with them. Third, he must be able to distinguish between supracultural, remember that's what's above culture and outside of culture, between supracultural and cultural norms. In other words, must be able to tell the difference between a truly biblical norm and a cultural norm. So that whole paragraph, bottom of that first page, the page previous, and the top of this page, that's an important paragraph. Because when we go into another culture and we are taking our culture with us into that culture, it is so easy for us to take behavioral norms into that culture and say they're biblical when they may not be. They may not be biblically commanded. And we need to be careful about that. So discerning the difference between supracultural, that would be biblical, that would be outside of culture, and cultural norm, and knowing that will be a big help to us. So a little bit of a explanation about that. Obedience to God's will. Your actions must always measure up to your teaching. One wrong act or reaction, even if not intended, can ruin your ministry. So again, we need to be careful because our actions can convey unintended ideas. Michael Green's description of early Christians on page 405 is worthy of reading and digesting, and we'll not do it right now, but go back to page 405 and read that because it is a tremendous description of what Christians in the early church were like, and how they lived and how they treated each other and how they were perceived by people outside of the church. How did the culture look at that? What did they see these Christians as being? And notice that there were many ways in which these Christians were just like everybody else, but there were some ways in which they were not like everybody else. And those ways in which they were not like everybody else really stood out. One author says it is imperative that people see the image of Christ, the image that true missionaries bear by virtue of creation, and more especially by redemption. And I think that is so very true. Number two, accommodation to cultural norms. How are you to be polite and proper in your new culture? And does that things that indicate such attitudes that are different from one culture to another, and so on and so on? Um, I've it's too, I don't know. I'm having what we might call bad luck with some of these illustrations because this copy didn't come out very well. But there's a really interesting, very helpful book, a big book. So you might want to find it in the library and refer to it. It's called Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands. It's written from a secular perspective, from a biblical perspective, and it talks about how to greet people and various kinds of politeness and relationship things in, I don't know, about 50 or 60 different countries. So, like when Brother Manley went to Egypt, to Korea the first time. Now he got the book. I mean, he actually bought the book for the mission, so we had it in our mission library there. So if you go into to South Korea, you look up Korea, and there's about, I don't know, 4 or 5 columns in the book that tell you things to do and not to do and what it means and all that sort of thing. And it was very helpful. So, do any of you remember? I'm starting to talk too fast. Do any of you remember a few years ago when Um, I think it I think it was President Obama, might have been before that with President Bush. But when one of our presidents was visiting, I believe it was Saudi Arabia, and was presented to the king of that country, and the president went, I forget precisely how he did it, but he bowed in a certain way. And there were repercussions. I mean, criticism in the press, criticism by people on the street. You know, he went and it was like he pledged the allegiance of our country to that king. He can't do that. No, he was accommodating himself to a cultural norm. He was greeting that king in what was a culturally accepted way. And it was not to say, hey, I'm here to give my country to you. That's how our people thought about it, but that's not how the Saudi Arabians looked at it. So we need to be aware of those kinds of things. Again, so it says in that next paragraph, when their standards are violated, people of another culture dismiss the offending missionary as another ignorant foreigner. So he loses his effectiveness among them. Hopefully, we develop a sensitivity toward the situation and take steps to learn better how to fit in. We do this largely by watching what others do and listening to what they say, and then imitating them. We also ask questions to learn why. Sometimes the answer is just because, but other times the answer might uncover a really important reason. For example, why does an Igbo visitor make diagonal marks on the floor with chalk and put a ring around his big toe? That's in the book. Does anybody remember that? Why does the visitor to an Igbo house put that ring around his toe and make marks on the floor with chalk? Remember? Okay, so that's your assignment for sometime this evening. Look that up, fill that blank. The kind of thing that we're talking about there can be illustrated by the story of a missionary in, I believe it was Kenya, who was translating the Bible. And he came to that verse in Revelation, which says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come into him and sup with him and he with me." Beautiful verse, beautiful invitation. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. And so the missionary translated that, and he took it to his Kenyan helper and said, "Is this a good translation?" And the Kenyan read it and said, "No, that is not a good translation. Instead of saying, you stand at the door and knock, he should say, behold, I stand at the door and call." And then he explained why. He said, if a person comes to a door in Kenya and knocks, he's probably an enemy. He's not a friend. And so he knocks on the door and then he listens. And if he hears sound inside to indicate that somebody is in the house and maybe coming to the door, he will scurry into the brush and hide so that nobody will see him. But what he's trying to do is find out if anybody's in the house, because if nobody's there, he's going to break in. Okay. So if you're a friend, you approach and you call out. And when you call, they recognize your voice and they recognize you as a friend, or they recognize you as this person that they're expecting or whatever. But to call is to indicate that you're a friend and not a foe. And I've used that as an illustration to say it's perfectly acceptable to translate that verse in that way, because you don't want them to read the Bible and think that Christ is their enemy and coming to the door and knocking so that he can break in if they're not there. So, so look that up, page 410. So what do you do when you're not sure? How should a missionary act when the cultural norms conflict with biblical standards? Or maybe you're not sure if they conflict with biblical standards. Maybe there's some questions. Not everything is perfectly spelled out in Scripture. Just for example, is the Bible does the Bible teach the absolute necessity of not drinking alcohol? Doesn't, does it? And so there are some churches that will allow social drinking, or at least ceremonial drinking of alcohol, because there is no absolute prohibition in Scripture. So again, what do you do in that other culture? So when I was in Egypt and they asked me if I were an ordained minister, and so could I do communion, and I said yes, because they hadn't had communion in that church for months. So here it is Sunday night, and somebody scurries out the door and buys a loaf of bread. Scurries back in. Okay, they bought something on Sunday, which for them is not a major problem, because in their country, two things are happening. One is there are 3 holy days. You got the Muslims there, that's Friday. You got the Jews there, that's Saturday. You got the Christians there, that's Sunday. So you got this conglomeration. And then for them also, it's the sundown to sundown thing. So sundown Saturday to sundown Sunday, and it was well after sundown by then. So for him to buy a loaf of bread and come back was not a problem. And then I noticed that they pulled open the pulpit door. They pulled out this kind of a tall box. It had religious symbols on all sides of it. Opened it up and pulled out this bottle, and they had this little set of glasses in a wooden tray, and they started pouring out this red liquid. And I'm thinking, I wonder if that's grape juice. It wasn't. And as soon as I drank it, I knew it wasn't. I had a bite to it. Yeah, I did it, and I was fine. I think that's a cultural thing. It's not in there. I don't think there's a scriptural prohibition, but we know we want to be careful about alcohol, right? And we also know people who have played with alcohol and have gotten trapped. And like I told my son, when I found him experimenting with a couple of things, I said, the best way to not become an alcoholic is not take the first drink. if you never take the first drink, you'll never be an alcoholic. Okay, so what do you do when you're in a situation, you're in that other culture, they're doing something different than you are used to doing. You've always done it a particular way. Maybe you've had solid biblical teaching to say it has to be this way. Maybe there's a kind of a questionable thing in there. Maybe you've heard it, but you've really wondered because, is this really just a cultural norm in North America, or is it a really biblical mandate, or just exactly what? So what do you do in a situation like that? Well, he says what I also have said and done. You carefully weigh all the factors, and then you trust the Lord to help you make the right decision in line with your conscience. And he presents a case on pages 411 and 412. So I think this section of the book, he had some really good examples to help us answer some questions. But a personal illustration, I hold a high view of Sunday, which many call the Lord's Day and others call the Christian Sabbath. I do not believe we ought to do business on Sunday. I do not believe we ought to be buying and selling on Sunday. I believe we ought to limit our traveling on Sunday so that we're not violating standards of Scripture and so on. Although I have traveled on Sunday under certain circumstances, I sometimes even wonder how far we may be pushing the envelope when we say, I can go to church on Sunday morning, and then I've got enough gas in my car, might get good enough mileage that I can drive until after midnight before I have to buy gas. And I can pack a lunch and have it in my car, so I don't have to stop at a restaurant. So I can be in the morning service, and I can drive, and I can do it. But you're not in the evening service. Is there a problem if you're not in the evening service? I mean, it's not like an absolute must. It's not, you have to be in the evening service. Or you're not a Christian. But isn't there something about the Lord's Day that's set aside for worship? And I've always wondered, are we pushing the envelope when we do that? I think we are, but I can't be adamant about it. I can't say the Scripture demands that we do a certain thing, and I have not always followed that feeling. Okay, and I've had my times when we would visit my mother-in-law. We would have service with her on Sunday morning in her church, have lunch with her, and then drive home in the evening, miss the evening service and so on. Because technically, we're not violating the Lord's Day, right? We're not buying gas, not buying food, and all that sort of thing. Okay, so I hold Sunday in high regard. But I was in a certain place holding services for a Hispanic church. They put me up in a hotel, and one of the church leaders told me after the morning service on a Sunday that he was the one responsible for providing my meal that day. And in times past, I had been in a couple of their homes for breakfast in one place and so on. So he said, "Follow me. I've got a couple people to take home, and then I'll take you to." Fine. So I followed him. He let some people off, and then he drives away. Drives out in the country, and I'm thinking, okay, he must live somewhere out of town. And then pretty soon he turns and goes across a little bridge into the next state over. And I'm thinking, oh, so he lives out of state. Well, that wasn't true either. What happened was I followed him into the parking lot of the shopping mall, and he pulled up and parked in front of a buffet style restaurant. Okay, this is Sunday. I hold a high view of Sunday and what we should or shouldn't do. And I'm really serious about it. So he and his family get out of the car, and I'm sitting there in this quandary that our authors talked about. And I'm tossing the questions around in my head, and I'm considering this thing and that thing and the other thing. And so, what do you guys think I did? Went in. Okay, that's one vote. The rest of you think? You're scared to voice your ideas? Huh? You think I'm in? Okay, that's 2 votes. Who else? So, okay, that's 3. Wow. Dennis? You go opposite of them. Okay. So instead of going in, well, okay. Hannah, what do you think?
I go in, it's like just talk to the person, like, this is my prediction.
Okay. So, um, let's say 3.5 that I went in, and no, I wouldn't work. That's, yeah, 3.5 that I went in, and 1.5 that I did. Does that work out to 5? Yeah, something like that. Okay, somewhere in there. Okay, so that's what you guys think that I probably did. Okay, we will I will go to what I did in a moment. Uh, what do you think I should have done? Whatever you think I did or didn't do, what do you think I should have done? And you might want to base that on how you look at the Lord's Day. You might want to base that on what I have said about how I feel about the Lord's Day, however that works out for you. But what do you think? If you were in that situation, let's put it that way, what would you have done? What would you have advised me to do? Dominic, you look like you're the one that's most ready to answer. You would go in? Why? Okay. Okay. So Dominic says that he would tell me to go in because if I were to tell these people that my conscience forbade me to go in and eat on Sunday, and they didn't know that ahead of time, I might do more damage to my relationship with them than if I just went ahead and went in and ate. That fair summary? Okay, Dominic says that's a fair summary. Okay, so he thinks that he would tell me to go in for that reason. Who's next? Oh wow, that's a good one. Okay, so Dennis says no. You should tell them what you. Yeah. Okay. So Dennis says that I should tell them that my conscience forbids me to do that. That this is Sunday. I don't believe in buying and selling and going to restaurants on Sunday, and carefully, kindly explain to them that this would violate my conscience, and so I'm sorry, but I can't go in. Is that fair? Okay. Okay. 2 down, 3 to go. So you would advise me not to go in because by telling them and showing them the example, I would be teaching them. Okay, that's a good one. That's a good one. Okay, 3 down, 2 to go. You'd probably go that way too. Tell them this is your conscience and so on and so on. Okay, Hannah.
I've been in that usually I don't advise her. I was and I'm gonna attend her family and their traditions. But I also think that this is my conviction. But I have one and I really repeated it. Just try to like explain.
And would you explain it on the spot, or would you explain it at another time?
I would explain it at another time.
Okay.
Because you don't want like that over heavy like that. You know?
Okay.
And oh, so we're not going to do this in the future? Like,
Okay. So for Tim, Hannah says that she would probably go in. She would recognize that this is maybe their custom and so on, that she has done it because she was with a family and she was out of state, and it was kind of their family tradition to eat out on Sunday after church, right? And so as not to offend them, so as not to be a rude person, so as not to damage the relationship and the fellowship, that she would go in. But at some point, she would explain to them what her convictions are, and that she, under those circumstances, probably wouldn't go again. So okay, so that's a pretty neat representation from the class. And Tim, maybe you want to send me an email on this and tell me what you think I should or shouldn't have done and why. Maybe I should hold off on what I did until next time so that, but I don't know. That's a month away. Well, we got 3 weeks between now and then, and IEC comes in the middle of it. So I went in. I thought about it on several levels. Number one, my high view of Sunday. I really, really hold a high view. Number two, my relationship with them, and the fact that with Latin people, relationship is so important. And along with that, hospitality is so important. And so they were extending to me their hospitality. And like Hannah, I didn't want to be rude. I didn't want to be offensive. Um, so I said, Lord, here's the situation I'm not really sure of, I'm not really comfortable in, but Lord, so as not to offend and so as not to break this relationship, I will, Lord, please forgive me, but I'm going in. I felt uncomfortable the whole time I was eating. It is difficult. I mean, if you have that kind of a standard, and you are, even if it's a situation where you feel like it's absolutely necessary, and I've been there too, when I was someplace and there was nothing else I could do, and I had to eat, so I went and did it. Felt uncomfortable the whole time, but I did it. I didn't feel like I like my conscience condemned me. I I do have and did have at that time an ongoing relationship with that church, and I have talked with the pastors. And here was one of my things too. This this person who was taking me was not the pastor of the church. Okay, and my concept of teaching these kinds of things is that I should teach the leaders, and the leaders should teach them. And so I've had conversations with the different pastors who have come along up until I resigned from the mission. So different pastors have heard what I said, and because of what I said, there were times after this occasion that I'm talking about when I was there on a Sunday and they had me in their home. Okay, so I think that my teaching, my example, were such that that at least when I'm there, they do what I like them to do. Um, yeah, but but this is really another one of those things where there is a lot of conversation. Um, some people say that commandment, um, about keeping the Sabbath day holy, that's not repeated in the New Testament. All the other 9 commandments are, but that one is not. And so they say, since it's not repeated, then it's not binding for us in our day of grace. I'm not sure I buy that. I see examples of Jesus, for example, on the Sabbath day. Might not be Sunday, it might have been Saturday, but it was a Sabbath day. And I see things that he was doing on the Sabbath day that were part of Sabbath tradition and part of worship. And so I think he was setting us an example that even though we do it now on Sunday instead of Saturday, it's an important day, and we need to reverence that day, and we need to hold it in high regard, and so on. So that's one aspect of it. Another thing is the whole idea about when the Sabbath is. Is it sundown to sundown? Is it 6 to 6? Is it midnight to midnight? Exactly what is it? So I was in a certain place where the pastor said to me on Sunday night after church, we always go out for pizza. You want to go with us? I don't know about that. So I said, what's the deal? And he said, we just always have practiced the Sabbath like the Bible teaches it, from sundown to sundown. So after sundown on Saturday, we don't do any business. We don't do any buying and selling. We don't do any of those kinds of things. And then after sundown on Sunday, the Sabbath is over. And so we go out and have pizza. So that was another one of those occasions when I did. And I did it because they had a good reason for doing it when they did. And if they truly were keeping the Sabbath after sundown on Saturday, then they're scriptural about doing it. And that's the way they do it in Egypt. So one of the churches that I've been to several times, they have a snack bar downstairs, have a bookstore under their church. And on Sunday morning, everything is closed. On Sunday before church, Sunday evening before church, everything's closed. Sunday evening after church, sundown, it's all open. So you can go to ice cream bars and buy a Christian book and whatever after church on Sunday night, because from sundown to sundown is when they practice the Sabbath. And I'm fine with that as long as they are consistent in doing that biblical thing. But there are a lot of other things we could talk about regarding that, and we don't have time for that sort of thing. But the whole lesson in all this stuff is that when we are in a different culture, whether it's another country, another part of our country, another church group, another denomination, and whatever, whenever we're in another culture, let's do our best to understand that culture. Let's do our best to live like what God wants us to do, what Scripture commands us to do. But then let's, as much as we can, also be accommodating in that other culture, so that we are not offensive, we're not rude, we're not breaking relationships, we're not doing damage to the preaching of the gospel. And by the way, I have had occasion in deputation work of turning down Sunday meals. And we had set up a service in a church in Pennsylvania, and I did not realize what their practice was. And the pastor told me that they would put us up in a hotel, which was fine, and so on. So that was all arranged. And so on Saturday evening, we're driving down the highway toward the hotel, and the pastor calls. And he says, how's everything going? Oh, doing fine. He said, I really intended to be at the hotel and greet you and meet you when you came in, but something's come up and I can't do it. So he said, I'm just calling to let you know that, the hotel has breakfast in the morning. So, you eat breakfast there, but just calling to let you know that after church, we'll be taking you out to eat. Okay. That was one of those times when I felt like I really needed to say, I'm sorry, but we don't do that. We don't believe we ought to be out doing that kind of thing on Sunday. And it kind of set him back. It was like, oh, really? No, well, we'll make some kind of arrangement. And they did. They prevailed upon a family to take my wife and me in for Sunday. I think they put an extra drumstick in the fryer and maybe an extra scoop of mashed potatoes in the pot or something. I don't know what but they fed us. It was fine, and we got along and so on. But even then, I think two things about that. Number one, I think Christian to Christian, church to church, that on that level, I think what I did was probably a good thing. I mean, they ought to know. And especially if they've had much relationship with Evangelistic Faith Missions, they ought to know that our missionaries don't go out like that. So I thought that was fine on that level. The other thing that I felt about it was, you know what? This family that prepared for us and fed us the next day, Pastor called them kind of at the last minute. And I wonder how much we put them out. I wonder how much of a burden we were on them. Like I said, all worked out fine. So, but let me just throw out one last word. If you get trapped in a situation like that, do the best you can, make the best decision you can make. And when it's all said and done, don't let Satan bug you about it and convince you that you've done wrong, that you have either sinned by buying on Sunday or you have sinned by offending those people. Don't let the devil bug you about it. Do the best you can, make the best decision you can based on your understanding of the situation and so on. And then go with it and say, Lord, just help me do better the next time if that's what I need to do. Okay? Because the devil will bug you about stuff like that. And he will bang you over the head. He'll make you feel like you've sinned. He'll make you feel like you've backslidden. He'll make you feel like you've gone back so far you never get back to God. I mean, if you've been there, if the devil's ever bugged you like that, you know what I mean. He can really be mean. So don't let him do that. Okay. Heavenly Father, thank you again for this class session that we just had. Thank you for things we've talked about. Thank you for our learning about cultural norms, cultural behaviors, and those kinds of things. And we just ask once again, Lord, would you help us as a class, as students, as a teacher, would you help us to learn the things that we need to know and the ways we need to act and the ways we need to relate to others so that we can honor and glorify thy name and we can fairly represent thy word and we can preach and teach a message that people can understand, they can accept, and they will have a fair opportunity of responding to that message and coming to know Jesus. Thank you for what you've done for us. Bless and help us over these next 3 or 4 weeks until we come back to class again. And as we do work for this class, for other classes, as we go to IHC, just make this a special time of honor and blessing. And we'll thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. God bless. You all take care. I am going to head out the door and go home because we have an Easter program